Next Saturday, we are finally out of the Apex for a UFC fight night, going to Atlantic City, where we have Manon Fiorot taking on Blanchfield. In this video, I'm going to be going through, kind of previewing this card, and just giving my predictions for every single fight here for this UFC fight night. It's a solid card, nothing crazy moving out of the Apex, but I just think having, real fans there, the atmosphere is going to be so much better, and there are definitely some solid fights on this card. So we're going to start off here at the bottom of the prelims. Angel Pacheco taking on Caolan Loughran. Loughran lost his UFC debut, but he has some decent experience heading into the UFC. He was a Cage Warriors champion and has some pretty solid wins leading up to getting his first UFC shot. Angel Pacheco's record is very, very soft. He competed on Dana White's Contender Series. He's coming off a loss in an absolute war against Danny Silva. Danny Silva recently picked up a win in the UFC. This dude, Angel Pacheco, has an absolute chin. That was a crazy fight with Danny Silva. He took a ton of shots. I just think Loughran has more high-level experience here, but like we saw in the Contender Series fight, Pacheco is going to be tough to put away, so I'm going with Loughran by decision. Now shifting over to Andre Petroski taking on Jacob Malkoun. Pretty interesting grappler-grappler matchup here. Andre Petroski has a really strong 5-1 record in the UFC, but that record's a little bit soft for UFC standards, if we're being honest. His first two opponents, probably not UFC caliber. I think one of them was like 3-2, and then another one was a dude who was like a late replacement during The Ultimate Fighter, so they kind of gave him another shot. But first two fights, whatever. Then he had nice wins over Nick Maximov and Wellington Turman, and then his most recent win was a competitive fight with Gerald Meerschaert. In his one loss, he got knocked out pretty quickly by Michel Pereira, but that's not really the threat we have to worry about here with Jacob Malkoun. Malkoun's 3-3 in the UFC. Not a great record, but it's kind of deceiving. He got absolutely nuked in 18 seconds in his debut by Phil Hawes before Phil Hawes' chin sadly deteriorated. Got knocked out very early on in that matchup, but he has decision wins over Abdulrazak Alhassan, AJ Dobson. He lost a really close fight to Brendan Allen, and we know since then Brendan Allen has just started climbing the rankings, stacked a ton of wins together, and then Malkoun also actually has a win over Nick Maximov. Was by decision compared to Petroski, who finished him pretty quickly, but still have wins over a common opponent. And then I believe in his most recent fight, he was DQ'd for an elbow to the back of Cody Brundage's head. Kind of controversial. People thought, he was winning early on. Brundage wanted a way out. Don't know if I love the fact that it was a DQ, but, he did throw the illegal shot, so it is what it is. I think in this matchup here, they're probably going to try to grapple each other. I think Malkoun's probably going to push that a little bit more, and I wouldn't be surprised if Petroski has more success early. I think he's the better overall athlete and the more explosive guy, but I expect Jacob Malkoun to have the better gas tank. He's shown the ability to wrestle over the full 15 minutes. Petroski can start to fade, and once he does start to fade, he kind of tenses up, really loads up on his shots, which leads to him getting even more fatigued. We've seen that in at least a few of his fights. So I think in this matchup, I think Petroski's going to come out. I think he's going to win the first round, but I think Malkoun's going to put a pace on him with the grappling, and I think Malkoun's going to end up winning the second and third rounds and take home a unanimous decision. Now next up is going to be a women's fight here with Victoria Dudakova taking on Melissa Gatto. I think this one's going to be pretty close. I think it's going to be a competitive matchup. Dudakova is undefeated in her career, 8-0. She's also 2-0 in the UFC. Her first win came with a freak arm dislocation injury to her opponent. Her second win, I believe it was over Jin Frey. Not super high level of competition. Melissa Gatto is 2-2 in her UFC career, but her losses have come to pretty high level opponents. Tracy Cortez, Ariana Lipski, who Cortez stacked another win after that one, and then Lipski with a really nice performance over Casey O'Neill. I think this one's going to be competitive. I'm just going to go with the fighter who hasn't lost yet, Dudakova. I think it could be a split decision, but I think she gets the slight edge here going up against Melissa Gatto. They've both beaten the lower quality opponents. Dudakova, kind of unknown if she is that high-level option. Gatto has already fallen to those two, so that's why I'm giving Dudakova the edge here. Next up is actually going to be a rematch, the rare kind of regional scene rematch in the UFC. We have Ibo Aslan taking on Anton Turkalj. So these two fought before they were in the UFC in 2020. I went back, I rewatched that fight. Ibo Aslan was working Anton Turkalj for the first like 6-ish minutes. He was landing big elbows in the first round, landed a takedown on Turkalj, did some ground and pound. He took him down early in the second round, kind of let him back up, and at that point it seemed like the gas tank just completely failed him. It was pretty much on empty early on in the second round. Turkalj took him down and then submitted him pretty quickly. Since that fight, they've kind of gone in two separate directions here, at least record-wise. Ibo Aslan is 4-0 with 4 first-round knockouts. It is kind of padded, though. 3 of those opponents had a losing record, but he also did get a first-round knockout on Dana White's Contender Series against, a solid regional guy with a solid record. But those other 3 KOs were to guys with losing records, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. Turkalj since then has been 2-3. He had a quick win after on the regional scene. Then he went on the Contender Series, won a decision, didn't get a contract, but then he took a short-notice replacement fight against Jailton Almeida, which he got cruised through. Also lost to Vitor Petrino, and then he also lost to Tyson Pedro. So 0-3 in the UFC, not a great sign, but I mean, the level of competition he's faced has been pretty high. Almeida's an absolute monster, and we have to remember Almeida's now a heavyweight. Turkalj is a 205er. Petrino seems like he's going to be making waves in the light heavyweight division, just beat Tyson Pedro. And then Pedro's, a solid, established UFC light heavyweight. So even though he is 0-3, I think this still should be a pretty close fight odds-wise. I just think I'm going to lean towards Ibo Aslan here. I think he's had some opportunities to shore up the gas tank. He's shown in his post-fights with Turkalj that he is still, very dangerous, especially early on in the first round. Turkalj hasn't necessarily gotten the opportunity to show significant improvements because he hasn't been able to string together many wins and 0 wins in the UFC. So I still think this is kind of going to be a similar game script where either Aslan gets him out early or Turkalj could have some success later on. Second half of the second round, third round, going to decision. But I think Ibo Aslan is going to be able to get him out here in this matchup, in this rematch. Next is going to be Denis Buzukja taking on Connor Matthews. Both these guys are coming from strong teams. Buzukja with Sarah Longo, and then Connor Matthews training out of the New England Cartel. Buzukja is 0-2 in the UFC, but he's faced pretty tough competition. First 2 matchups were Sean Woodson and Jamall Emmers, and I'm pretty sure that Woodson fight was on very, very short notice, and I think he actually missed weight for that one, and then got finished pretty quickly by Jamall Emmers, but I do think Emmers is pretty underrated, and is actually going to be fighting it later on this card. I think this is a much more appropriate matchup, just skill-wise, for Buzukja, going up against Connor Matthews here. Matthews is very, very tough. He has a nice chin. We saw that in his first Contender Series fight against Francis Marshall. Prior to getting that shot on the Contender Series, his record was wildly padded. He was undefeated, but his 5 opponents were 0-7, 1-8, 2-1, 15-97, the legendary Jay Ellis, and then 1-2. Since then, after losing to Francis Marshall, he has 2 wins over a guy who was 8-4, and then 10-0. So the competition has gotten a little bit better. I'm going to give the slight edge to Denis Buzukja here. I feel like he can mix it up. He's fought in the UFC, obviously hasn't gotten wins, but I'm just not sure if Connor Matthews has faced the same level of competition that Denis Buzukja has. So I'm going to go with him, but I do think it could be a pretty competitive fight. Next up is going to be Julio Arce taking on Herbert Burns. I'm going to be honest, it's tough to pick Herbert Burns here. The last time he racked up a win was in 2020. He's been finished in his last 2 fights. His last appearance was in July of 2022, where we had Bill Algeo pretty much break him. He was exhausted. I guess his knee was messed up. Bill Algeo had him on the ground, stood up, told him to get up, and Herbert Burns just could not. He couldn't get up. He was exhausted. The knee was busted up. You have the picture of Gilbert Burns carrying him out, Gilbert Burns' brother, if you guys were not familiar. So it's going to be tough to pick Herbert Burns here. Julio Arce is going to be up at 145. He's kind of bounced back and forth between 135 and 145. He's also gone win-loss over his last 8 fights, so hasn't been able to build a ton of momentum. But looking at some of his wins at 145 before he was starting to go down to 135, he has a win over Dan Ige. He has a win over Julian Erosa, who also has some solid wins here at 145. So my prediction here is going to be Julio Arce kind of wears on him. I don't think Herbert Burns is going to be able to get this one to the ground super consistently. I think Arce is going to piece him up on the feet. I think Herbert Burns is going to start to fade, and I think Julio Arce finishes him via knockout in the 3rd round. The next matchup is going to be Virna Jandiroba taking on Luque Godinez. And Loopy Godinez is one of, if not the most active fighter in the UFC. She made her UFC debut in April of 2021, and she has already fought 10 times in the UFC. This is going to be her 5th fight within a calendar year, and she has 4 straight wins. So this could be 5 wins within a calendar year if she beats Virna Jandiroba here. I do think Virna is a pretty decent step up in competition. She's coming off back-to-back wins over Angela Hill and Marina Rodriguez. They do have Angela Hill as a common opponent. Loopy Godinez actually lost to Angela Hill, but I do think she's grown since then. I think this is a pretty decent matchup here for Loopy. Virna typically is going to want to take her opponents down. I think Loopy has really strong grappling. We know she's a very good wrestler. That's kind of been the frustration sometimes with Loopy, is that she doesn't go more towards that wrestling, but I don't know if that's the approach she's going to want for this fight. I think she's the better striker. I think she's going to want to keep this standing. I don't know if Virna is going to be able to impose her game plan, her grappling. So I think Loopy's going to, kind of just edge her out on the feet, and I think she is going to win by decision. Next is going to be Nate Landwehr, Nate the Train in the UFC, taking on Jamall Emmers. Nate the Train is finally back. I would lean towards this fight staying on the feet. Both these guys can implement their wrestling. I think Landwehr's probably the better wrestler, but he also typically just likes to go in there and scrap. Not always going to put out the highest fight IQ game plan. If you guys remember his crazy matchup against David Onama, where he was almost finished in the first round a couple different times, then just, wore out Onama, hurt him a bunch of times, was able to take him down, would, take him down, and then just stand up right away, start pumping up the crowd. The dude is super fun to watch. And then for Jamall Emmers, he can wrestle. We've seen him do it in a few fights. I think he landed a lot of takedowns over Giga Chikadze, but it's typically not going to push a super wrestling heavy game plan. Landwehr has been in some kind of meme-worthy fights, kind of like the moment I just talked about, but he does have legit skills and is just an absolute dog. You really are going to have to kill him to get him out of there to finish him. Even if he gets finished, he's going to, still try to fight. He's going to be the dude that's going to the ref being like, no, I'm good. My prediction for this one's going to be Nate Landwehr, and I'm going to be honest, it's kind of just like a homer pick. It's a fan pick. I love this dude. I love watching him fight, so I hope he gets the win, and I'm going to be going with Nate Landwehr by 2nd round knockout. Now, looking at Chidi and Njokuani taking on Rhys McKee, I think this is kind of an interesting matchup here. Looking at Chidi and Njokuani, he started off his UFC career with 2 brutal round 1 knockouts. Looked like he was just going to buzzsaw through everyone. Since then, he has lost 3 straight. And cardio has been a big issue. He's hurt guys in 2 of those 3 fights, RoboCop and Michel Oldachechuk. If you guys remember in that RoboCop, he landed an elbow early on, rocked him. RoboCop had the huge gash. I think it was like in the middle of his forehead. It was nasty, but he hurt him, kind of ran out of gas. I believe he got finished in the 2nd round. Michel Oldachechuk hurt him in the beginning of the 1st round, and I think he ended up getting finished in the same round. So he's still having success early on. He just hasn't been able to seal the deal, and he starts to fade. Rhys McKee is 0-3 in the UFC. He has losses to Khamzat Chimaev, which that's a tough UFC debut, Alex Morono, which is a pretty tough 2nd UFC fight, and then Angelusa, which is the start of his 2nd stint. He was released or just asked to go back to the regional scene after his 2nd fight. So starting his 2nd run here with the loss to Angelusa, he has a really solid chin, but he's also very hittable. I think Chidi and Njokuani, I think this is the level of opponent where he's going to be able to actually go out and finish Rhys McKee early on. So I'm going to go with Chidi. I think he's going to crack him early on and knock him out within the 1st round. In this next matchup, we have Bill Algeo taking on Kyle Nelson. Both these dudes are going to primarily get their work done on the feet, both mainly strikers, but both guys do have the ability to kind of mix in the grappling if they really need to. When I'm comparing these 2 guys, I kind of feel like Bill Algeo just has Kyle Nelson's number on pretty much every aspect of mixed martial arts. I think Algeo's likely the better striker. I think he's also probably more dangerous. I would also give him the edge in the grappling department. Bill Algeo has also just faced better competition and had success over that better competition. He's won 4 of his last 5. The wins came against Alexander Hernandez, which is a solid win, TJ Brown, Herbert Burns, Joe Anderson Brito. That Brito win is aging very, very well. And then his one loss was a split decision to Andre Fili, who is pretty much like the level of competition right outside the top 15. So those are some solid wins, and then a good fight. If you're going to lose, at least you're losing to someone who's like a borderline top 15 fighter. We have Kyle Nelson on a 2-fight win streak over Padilla, and builder. I just don't think that level of competition is stacking up to what we've seen out of Bill Algeo. So I think Kyle Nelson is very durable. Bill Algeo, not necessarily like crazy power. So I'm going to go with Bill Algeo with like a 29-28, maybe a 30-27 decision. I think he's going to probably clearly win it, but could have some back and forth rounds there. So going with Bill Algeo by decision. In this next matchup, we have Nursultan Ruzaboyev, probably butchering that name. I'm sorry, Ruzaboyev, taking on Cedric Dumas. I'm excited to see this Ruzaboyev guy back. He knocked out Bruno Fajeda in the first round of his UFC debut, very impressively. This dude is huge for the middleweight division. He's 6'5". I will say he has like a crazy huge record, but for someone with 40 plus pro fights, his pre-UFC schedule is very, very soft, but he's clearly very dangerous, both as a striker and a grappler. He's 11 knockouts, 20 submissions, only 2 decisions, so the dude is a finisher. For Dumas, he is 2-1 in the UFC, but his level of competition has been fairly weak. He lost to Josh Frem, I believe, in his debut, and he has wins over Cody Brundage and Abu Azaitar, which not super high competition here. My prediction for this one, I just think Ruzaboyev is the better overall fighter. I think he's going to find a way to submit him in the first round. We've seen Dumas, I think he got guillotined by Josh Frem. He's willing to engage in the grappling situations. Either way, whether it's submission, knockout, I do think Ruzaboyev finds a way to finish Dumas in this matchup. Pivoting over to Chris Weidman versus Bruno Silva. I so badly want to see a Chris Weidman win here. I mean, I think most fans, probably unless you're from Brazil, you are rooting for Chris Weidman in this matchup. And stylistically, it's not a bad matchup for Chris Weidman. Bruno Silva has lost 4 of his last 5. The level of competition has been pretty high. It's not like he's losing to bums. He's definitely not a scrub, but on a little bit of a skid. And then when we look at Bruno Silva's losses, 7 of his 10 losses have been by submission. So I do think if Chris Weidman can impose his grappling, I would not be shocked if he's able to find a finish here over Bruno Silva. But looking at Chris Weidman, he's also 1-4 in his last 5. We know he had the gruesome leg break against Uriah Hall. Took a long time to recover from that, as he should. Returned in last August. Kind of got his legs chewed up by Brad Tavares. Lost the decision. He's still a dog. He did not quit. Also didn't get knocked out, which was a decent sign. He had, been finished in his kind of rough stretch since he lost the title. They actually do have Brad Tavares as a common opponent. That was actually Bruno Silva's last win. He knocked out Brad Tavares. So I really, really want Chris Weidman to win this one. I want to pick him, but if I'm being realistic, I already made one fan pick with Nate Landwehr, so I'm going to go with Bruno Silva, unfortunately, with a round 2 or round 3 knockout. Now, shifting over to the co-main event, Vicente Luque taking on Joaquin Buckley. I think at this point, sadly to say, Luque is probably out of his prime. He had the loss to Belal Muhammad, which is fine. Belal, very strong fighter, has racked up a nice win streak here. But then we saw him get his chin cracked by Jeff Neal, and it wasn't a super competitive fight. He got hit a lot, wasn't having a ton of success offensively. And then his most recent fight was a kind of grimy decision win over RDA. Pretty big clinch fest, not a ton of output, from either guy, at least in terms of from range. Looking at Joaquin Buckley, he's 2-0 since moving down from middleweight now to 170, and I definitely think he has the power and explosion to finish Vicente Luque if he catches him, especially now that we have seen that chin cracked, because before, Vicente Luque could eat some nasty shots and just keep going. Not sure if that's going to be the same, durability after he was finished by Jeff Neal. But I also think just overall, Vicente Luque is the more well-rounded guy. He's powerful. He can submit you. He has impressive submission skills. So I do think I'm still going to give the edge to Vicente Luque. I think he's going to find a finish late in the 3rd round. I do think this is going to be competitive. I would not be shocked if this is like a back-and-forth fight where Buckley might hurt him early, Luque hurts him in the 2nd, and then Luque ends up finding a finish. That's kind of how I think this is going to go, but I do think Luque ends up, I'm going to go with knockout in the 3rd round. And then the final fight of the night, we have Erin Blanchfield taking on Manon Fiorot. Seems like people aren't super excited for this main event. I get it, but this really should be like a number one contender fight. This should be the next challenger after Shevchenko-Grasso 3, unless somehow maybe Valentino wins a close fight, and then you're going to the fourth one like we saw with Figueiredo and Moreno. But if that fight ends clearly between Shevchenko and Grasso, I do think the winner of this one will face them, and I definitely think they will have earned it. Both these women are 6-0 in the UFC, and the 125 division is really racking up some strong contenders here. You have obviously the two women fighting for the title again, Blanchfield taking on Fiorot. You have Macy Barber making waves. You have Amanda Ribas, Rose Namajunas. I'm recording this before that fight night, but one of them could kind of emerge as a contender in this division. So I do think it's trending in the right direction. Looking at these two women, they don't have a ton of 5-round experience, which is what this main event is going to be. Fiorot has gone 5 rounds one time from what I saw, at least in her pro career, and it was her third pro fight, which is kind of crazy to go 5-5s in your third pro fight. I did not see that Blanchfield has gone 5 rounds. You would assume that this is going to be more of a grappler versus striker matchup. Not that they both can't engage in the other one, but Blanchfield's probably going to want to impose her grappling. Fiorot's probably going to want to keep this one on the feet. Fiorot is going to be, I think, the bigger fighter physically, which could be tough for Blanchfield to really, impose her grappling. Fiorot has not shown to have a deficiency there. She's faced solid grapplers like Jennifer Maia, Mayra Buena Silva, who maybe Mayra Buena Silva is not going to be like the wrestling, type, but she does have dangerous submissions. We saw her submit Holly Holm, but I don't think any of Manon's previous opponents are quite at the grappling level of an Erin Blanchfield. In Blanchfield's last fight, she really was not able to take Taila Santos down, but she was still able to grind out kind of a grimy decision, holding her in the clinch, landing some strikes from there. Now, Taila Santos is very physically imposing for this division, so just because Taila Santos could stuff to takedowns does not necessarily mean that Manon Fiorot cannot also. But I think in a 5-round fight, if Erin Blanchfield isn't able to take down Manon Fiorot, not only take her down, but also rack up some control time, if she's not able to do that, I do think she might struggle in the later rounds, and you don't want to be standing tired in front of Manon Fiorot. We've seen her beat Katlyn Chookagian in a striking battle. We've seen her beat Rose Namajunas in a striking battle, even though she did mess up, I think it was her hand or her finger. She still won on the feet there. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Manon Fiorot, especially if this one's going long. Who knows? Maybe we'll go out there, Blanchfield takes her down with ease in the first round and ends up locking something up, a submission, or is just able to control her throughout the entire fight. But I really haven't seen much of a deficiency in Manon's grappling, and so if she can keep it standing, I do think she gets the win, but I also think it's going to be a pretty competitive fight. Hopefully one of them makes a statement, because I think it'll add some hype to the next title fight after Shevchenko-Grasso, kind of shake up that division, get some fresh blood in there. But that's going to wrap it up for my picks for UFC Fight Night Atlantic City. Blanchfield taking on Fiorot. Like I said, decent card, nothing crazy, but it's just good to get out of the Apex. Those events are just so dead, so good to keep it moving. Let me know your guys' thoughts. Do you disagree on any picks? Who are you going with this weekend? Let me know. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.